everyone! Today I'm going to be answering some questions from the Costube 21 Questions Challenge, and I figured I would combine that with a sewing video. So I'm going to start off with a brief explanation of what I'm going to be making, and then I'll switch over to voiceover and sewing footage. My general plan is to make a dress inspired by the chemise à la reine. This style was popularised by Marie Antoinette in the 18th century and caused a scandal due to its similarity to the chemise, or underwear, hence the name. But the style itself actually originated with free and enslaved women in the French Caribbean colonies under the name robe à la Creole. There's enough history on this topic to cover a whole video in and of itself, how the robe à la Creole became the chemise à la reine, how that later evolved into Regency styles, which were then credited as being inspired by Greek and Roman fashions, and how we somehow haven't learned to stop appropriating in the 250 years since this happened. But since my focus today is on answering questions, I'm going to leave you with some links in the description to some resources, as well as to some other creators who've either talked about the history or who have made their own chemise dresses. If you've been around a little while, you know that I rarely aim for historical accuracy. If you're new, please don't be shocked by the elastic and the overlocker. We're aiming for inspired by, not for original practice. I won't be explaining what I'm doing during the video, so if you're interested in the sewing process, I'd recommend pausing here for a moment to look at my plan. And without further ado, let's get into the questions. What is your favourite genre of costuming? We're off to a ridiculous start here because basically I like way too many things to pick a favourite. I do like historical costuming, but I rarely enjoy projects that aim for total accuracy, so I've really been enjoying history bounding lately. It works out well for me because I'm able to take inspiration from history, but don't have to justify my inaccurate choices. And I have an absolute love for corsetry. I'm not sure that's really a genre, per se, but corsets are probably my favourite thing to make, both historical styles and more fantasy-inspired ones. What originally got you into costuming? Historical dramas. I'm sure that's the same for a lot of people, actually. I think The Illusionist was probably one of the first films that got me interested in historical costumes, specifically. Pins or pattern weights? I'll use either, or nothing, depending on what I'm cutting out and how precise it needs to be, and depending on what's closest. What project taught you the most? I'm sure I've talked about this before, but it's probably my Atlantis corset. I'll pull you back out of the sewing footage for just a second to show you a picture. It's not necessarily that I learned a lot of new skills while working on this, but it was really the first time for me that I combined the type of stuff I was doing at work with the types of projects that I wanted to do. And it was really a turning point for me to realise that I didn't need a reason to make the type of projects that I wanted to make. Drape, draft, or commercial patterns? Usually drape, though depending on the garment I'll occasionally draft too. This dress was drafted, for example. I do usually make my own patterns, but that's because I enjoy it, and because I've also started selling my patterns, which obviously isn't an option if you aren't the one making the pattern. If you're just making things for yourself, then I do think you should do whatever works best for you. And to be fair, I have started using commercial patterns again in the past year too, particularly for projects that are just for fun, and ones where I don't want to have to think about how everything is going to work. Are you team cut or team trace for pattern pieces? Definitely tracing. I like knowing that I can go back to a previous version of a pattern so I generally trace and make a new copy, even when I'm altering and refining a pattern I've made myself. It does end up being a lot, which is one of the reasons I wanted to switch to working digitally. It means it's quicker and easier for me to make changes, I need fewer physical copies, and I don't need to stress about the idea of accidentally losing a pattern piece that I might need again at some point. What skill would you like to learn? I'd like to learn weaving. I'd really like to make a garment from start to finish, from spinning and dyeing wool, to weaving it, to sewing it into a garment. And I can do everything in there aside from the weaving, but we definitely don't have space for a loom right now, so it's something that will probably have to wait for quite a long time. How many pieces are lurking in your UFO bin? UFOs in this context means unfinished objects, or projects that aren't finished, by the way, so I think the term comes from the quilting community. Anyway, it really depends on what you count as an unfinished project. If it's projects that I've completely set aside, then it's 3. If it's projects that are actively somewhere in the process of being planned or worked on, then it's around 20? What's the most unconventional material you've used? So I used to work in a costume prop workshop before last year, so I've used a lot of things that aren't necessarily weird or unconventional, but are pretty far outside of the historical stuff you see me do on this channel, like fiberglass, foams, resins, vacuum forming. I've also used a lot of things that are more unconventional, like IKEA Tupperware, hair extensions, and fake snow. To be honest, there were so many weird things that there isn't even anything that particularly stands out. Which era or genre would you still like to make a costume of? I'd like to do more 18th century. I have done a couple more casual or history-bounding projects which were inspired by the 18th century, including this one, but I'd like to make a more accurate outfit. Or possibly a whole wardrobe? Do you sew over your pins or take them out as you go? I take them out. Has the pandemic changed what you sew? How? It definitely has changed it. The obvious thing being that the costume industry basically shut down and there wasn't any work. But I think beyond that, my own work has changed a lot too. I'm making less extravagant pieces for photo shoots and more practical things for myself to wear. Which is probably because I spent the last few years in messy workshop clothes and coveralls, and right now I actually have the freedom to wear whatever I want. And of course, there weren't any photo shoots, so my motivation to finish outfits for non-existent photo shoots was also non-existent. The dress I'm making in this video is the first step that I've taken back in that direction. What did you do or learn in the past year that you are most proud of? I would probably have to say that I'm most proud of releasing a sewing pattern. I had been planning on doing this for a while, and earlier this year I just decided that I was going to push through, learn the things I needed, and get one published. And I did! It's a skirt pattern called the Edith skirt, and there's even a video showing how to make it on my channel. I do have a couple more patterns that are in various stages, but in case you hadn't guessed by the UFO question, I like to work on a lot of projects at the same time, so it hasn't exactly been a linear process. But the next one on the list is a corset pattern, which is in the final stages of editing. At the moment, I'm just trying to decide whether to release it on its own, or to film a video about it as well. What costume would you like to revisit? I made a sci-fi costume while I was at uni, and I think I'd like to try that again. Maybe not remaking exactly the same thing, But over the past few years, I've worked on a couple of different sci-fi films and TV shows, and I think I could do a really good job of it now. Do you pick a project and then procure materials, or collect materials and let them speak to you? I usually pick a project first. Or I see a pretty fabric and immediately start thinking of projects I could make from it to justify the purchase. The only exception is scrap bins at really nice fabric stores. I do have a decently sized collection of small pieces of pretty silks that I bought just because I knew I'd never get that fabric for that price again. What are your goals moving forward? The book I'm writing is still a really big goal for this year. That was my main goal for this year, really. There's still a lot to do, but I'm slowly making progress. I'd also like to find the time to post more videos, and I've actually been thinking about making some behind-the-scenes videos about the process of writing the book. The sewing videos take a pretty long time, so if that's something you're all interested in, it would mean I could upload more frequently. Scissors or rotary blade? Again, both. I'm more likely to cut larger things with scissors, smaller things that fit easily on my cutting mat with a rotary cutter, and very small things with scissors for precision. Or just whatever's closest. Do you have any bad sewing habits? I really don't like making mock-ups, though I'm not sure it's really a bad habit because I usually just end up making a series of wearable mock-ups instead. Machine sewing. Barefoot, socks, or shoes on the pedal? Any. I know that's going to be controversial, but if you're sewing in a workshop where there are shards of metal and plastic, loads of dust, and stray scalpel blades on the floor, you get used to sewing with shoes on pretty quickly. And I promise, it really isn't any different. Do you put your pins in parallel to the seam line you're sewing, or do you pin perpendicular? I usually put my pins perpendicular to the seam, but if I'm doing something that needs to be more precise, then I'll alternate them. I can sew either way though, and it doesn't really bother me as long as they're easy to grab. Tea, coffee, or chocolate? Definitely coffee. I worked in cafes for a few years, and my collection of coffee-related things is probably slightly over the top. I could probably run a small cafe out of my home. And that's it for the questions. Stay tuned if you want to see the results of the photo shoot, and let me know if you liked this format or if you prefer more tutorial type videos. Thanks for watching!